check. No drip this. Wet. Tell them run it on. No sleep, no rest. Might crash, might wreck.
Alright, if you saw the title of this video, it's pretty obvious what we're talking about. Fitting 37s on a 120 series or fitting 37s on an FJ in general. There's a lot more that goes into it than people think. I'm sure you can just bolt on a set of 37s and gimp the shit out of the travel and not do any of this work, and you can drive around and it'll look cool, I guess. That is not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is actual proper fitment of 37s or 38s on a 120 series or on a FJ. Some of the other 120 series platforms, it's definitely a little bit tougher on. You have to do a little bit more work on to get them to actually fit, but the FJ is definitely the easiest to fit bigger tires on, and I'll talk a little bit about that once we get out of the vehicle. But before we do, there's a couple things I want to discuss that need to be precursors to it. If you're running a 07 to 09 FJ, they came with 8-inch rear ends. Most of them are E-lockers. Regardless, the 8-inch is not strong enough for a 5,000 pound vehicle on 37s or 38s. The 8-inch is barely strong enough for 35s. I blew one up on 35s and I blew one up on 37s. When I put the 37s on, I knew that was going to be a weak point and an issue, but I wasn't concerned about it as much as I am now, realizing, that it's just not that strong of an axle, especially the E-locker. The 8-inch with factory or regular 8-inch with an ARB in it is much stronger 8-inch E-locker, and I can do a whole explanation on that. If you have a 2010 to 2014, 2015 4Runner or FJ or GX460, I guess, they all were 8.2s. The 8.2 is quite a bit stronger than the 8-inch. The spider gears in the E-locker are not nearly as strong as some aftermarket carriers, so those are a weak point in those. Not nearly as bad as the 8-inch itself. The 8-inch itself is just not a good axle. The 8.2 is significantly better. So I blew my 8-inch up again on 37s, and then about a year ago I built a Ford 9-inch that I put in the rear. I used a 89 F-150 housing, 35 spline nitro chromalies, 35 spline ARB, 486s, strange engineering, HD dropout, and all of that is built to handle a ridiculous amount of power. The guy that actually set the gears up for me, his name's Chris, he's local to us. He recommended I do a load bolt. The way the 9-inch is built, it's strong enough to where I don't think on this size of tire I would ever have an issue with having a load bolt or not having a load bolt, but the fact that I have one is just that extra little bit of security. And when Chris explained to me why I should do it, I just agreed and said, hey, let's go ahead and do it. I took it to work and drilled and tapped the carrier for that, just for the aspect blowing rear discs up all the time. If you're looking at going to a big tire, I don't want to say even at 35, because if you wheel smart on a 35, you will be okay for the most part. You'll probably eventually blow it up, but I wheel with a lot of guys on 35s and FJs that have never had an issue. The next thing is the front end. There's a lot of guys out there running factory tie rods on a bigger tire. His thought process is you'd rather bend a tie rod than replace a steering rack, which I agree with. The factory tie rods are much weaker than the factory steering rack is, so I try to maximize the strength of the tie rod by modifying some Tundra tie rods. So I modified those, so hopefully they're still weaker than the steering rack. I haven't blown a steering rack up yet, but hopefully they're still weaker than the steering rack, but they're not weak, nearly even close to as weak as the factory FJ tie rods are. And you can actually check, I did a whole video explaining that. I'm over a year having them installed and I haven't had any issues with them yet. The ball joints are still tight. I haven't bent or broke one yet. It's solid mounted, it's not mounted on bushing, so if I'm gonna break a rack, I mean, I'll be the one to break one. So those are the things before you even consider doing 37s. that you need to consider, if that makes sense, is long travel. It is hard to get 37s to clear factory width. You just have to, basically everything that I did, you have to be way more aggressive with when it comes to clearancing and all of that. So just keep that in mind. Long travel does make this a lot easier. Making a vehicle that is super capable long travel on 35s is not that hard to do in this chassis. Making a vehicle that's super capable on 37s or 38s is a lot more work for a little bit more gain. So your gain from stock to 35s and a good setup and proper clearance and proper travel and everything is like here, and going to 38s is like here. So you gain quite a bit more, but it's a significant amount of more work to actually get there. So let's get out of the truck and actually talk about the things that I had to do. So I just recently added more clearance to the rear right here. I hammered this in a little bit more. It's gonna need, this was going from 37s to 38s. Here with 37s, I barely rubbed at all. So I hammered it in a little bit. So now it's hammered a little bit more. I just need to clean it up and paint it. I'm making new lower links right now, and I'm actually gonna push the axle back another inch to help with that clearance. Other than that, in the rear, I don't have any clearance issues except for right here. I just had to hammer that in a little bit because there's where the inner fender mounts, or where the outer fender, the factory fender flare mounts, I had to get rid of that. I run Dobinson MRR, whatever they're called, long travel shocks. They're just over 12 and a half inches of travel or something like that. So I run those. I do run them a little bit different than the factory setup. They're in the factory mounting location up here, but down below I actually dropped the frame mount a little, or the axle side mount a little bit to do that, so I would have full spring compression at full droop, and it gave me a little bit more up travel that way. Now in the front, it was a little bit more work. I just did a little bit more massaging. That'll all eventually get cut out. But as you can see, the factory inner fender is at this height. My inner fender is now at this height, which this height is about an inch above the outer fender. This height on an FJ is much higher than it is on a 4Runner or a GX. So on a GX, this inner fender actually sits quite a bit lower. I don't know why that is, but that's just how it goes. The factory battery mounts right here, and this whole battery tray comes out. So I actually notch a battery tray in, and I'll show you everything inside in a minute. And I ran this all the way up to the headlight just like that. And then down here, I still have the factory body mount, and I didn't do anything crazy with the firewall here except hammered it back. And this is just undercoating, that's not actually metal cracking. So this is all hammered back quite a bit, and then I just hammered this all back some more, and it's got plenty of clearance. When I have a little bit more time, maybe this summer, I'm going to actually come up here, cut this out, and then redo this tub. It doesn't hit now, but I had about a hand width of clearance here on 37s, and now on 38s I have like a finger width of clearance. I definitely want to just clean that up a little bit more than it already is. I'm kind of fighting the wind a little bit right now. So as you can see, this is moved in here. I ended up moving my compressor down here. I had to redo this line on the trail, so that's not usually like that. It's usually tucked underneath and ran inside transmission line, but I had to redo that on the trail because it touched my cat and started leaking. You can see this is all my aftermarket wiring up here. Yes, I do need to, I have new cable for here and here to actually be able to supply this with the proper wiring, but regardless. So the battery used to mount here, as you can tell, and that's where my compressor is now. So moving all of this in, I had to move the fuse box in the same amount I moved all of this. I just made new mounts for it, and then the fender well obviously is also moved in. Routed around here, you can see the batteries over here. This is an Odyssey Group 31. I made a custom battery tray for it, laid it on its side, which you can do with these. It is right above the header, so you might get extra heat on here that you didn't get before on the battery, but I haven't noticed any issues with this battery getting too hot or anything like that. You do have to remove the washer reservoir. It sits somewhere in here that I don't actually remember where it sits. That's extra power steering fluid that I don't actually have to keep in here. I forget it's always in here. And currently my washer reservoir is just a bottle that I poked a hole in the lid so it could vent, and I just fill that so it's a little bit less. I don't run a snorkel. I might have to in the future, but I haven't had any issues with it, so I've been running just a factory intake. I tried to get my IATs down with this gold stuff and it didn't really work, so just ignore that. As you can see, I moved the fender well the same amount in on this side, and then I didn't have to move this as much on this side. I just moved, cut this, and I actually angled it in up front. It's hard to tell on the camera, but this is actually moved in a little bit further than the other side, but I wanted to keep that factory battery tray as best as I could to mount my compressor on. You can see I don't have a fender flap in here, so when it gets really rainy, I actually pull this the tube out of here and put it behind the headlight, and it's wintertime, so I don't really notice an IAT difference. In the summertime I do, so I point it back out there. The filter does get pretty dusty, so you just have to be up on changing that. You can see I did the same thing on this side, and then the same massaging down here. Again, this is going to get cut out and to match the other side, because on the other, like I said, on the other side I had about a hand width of clearance here with 37s, and now I have like a finger width with 38, so I knocked everything back a little bit further. So I'm going to relocate the body mount and cut this out to match this up here a little bit. Just for the haters, you can see that's a Duro bump. That is for factory control arms, factory setup, and then on the All Pro Long Travel, this is actually moved down. So I have more up travel than most factory setups have, and with the factory bump stop, so I don't get up travel at all. And then for everyone wondering, this is my 9-inch. It's pretty simple, still uses a Toyota drive shaft, Toyota flange, welded on a skid plate on the bottom. It's 3-linked. You can see the 3rd link up here. I'm making new lower links, so these will be quite a bit stronger in a couple days here, but that's pretty much it for the setup. And lastly, for wheels and tires, we just went wheeling and it was super muddy, so that's what all this blue stuff is on here. Also, our Patagonia 38 1350 R17s. I'll do a video on these. Super happy with this tire. I had them in 37s. I bought them again in 38s, so clearly I like them. Method 105 real bead locks, and the whole setup weighs about 105 pounds, so I really like it. Alright guys, that's just a quick explanation on what it takes to actually fit a bigger tire on this vehicle. It's not just a bolt-on thing that clears just fine. There is people that do that. I don't rub anywhere anymore. I rubbed a little bit in the rear like I showed you guys, and that's about it. I appreciate everyone watching. Please share this around, subscribe. I know I've said it a million times and it's probably getting annoying, but I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So again, thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna have some wheeling videos coming soon. We just went to Walker Valley this week and I didn't film any of it, which might upset some people, but we just want to go out and have a good time with the guys. Getting out of the snow season now, and now we're getting into what I call wet rock season. So that's always a good time, and it really shows a testament to the vehicles and everything and different setups. And then once we get in the summertime, we get in a dry rock season. We have a Moab trip planned, and I'm definitely going to try to film as much of that as I can. So again, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it.